Hello and welcome to the RedLine Solutions webinar on fast and easy terminal emulation modernization. I'd like to give a big thank you for everybody joining us today. Promises to be a really great session. I'm very pleased to have some wonderful presenters with me. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Justin Griffith, the CTO of StayLinked, and our very own CEO, Todd Baggett from RedLine Solutions. The agenda this morning is a quick overview of RedLine, and then Justin will take us through the whys and wherefores of upgrading your terminal emulation application. Todd will then go through some of the Zebra mobile equipment available today that will run this great application. Then we'll follow up with a Q&A session. So a little bit about RedLine. RedLine was established in 1997, headquartered in Santa Clara, California. We're a leading system integrator with an extensive knowledge of barcode, mobile computing, wireless networks, and RFID systems. We work closely with our clients to develop the most suitable, cost-effective solutions for their needs and have a variety of support options to keep those systems running smoothly. We specialize in warehouse management, inventory control, logistics, asset tracking, healthcare, and product labeling systems. We have an excellent in-house development team that have created a suite of SaaS and server-based inventory and traceability solutions, and we work with many types of customers from Fortune 500 to startups across North America. RedLine partner with a number of very well-known hardware and software solutions providers, but we are very proud to be a Zebra Premier Business Partner and a partner of StayLinked. So enough about us, and I will pass you over to Justin.
Line for hosting this. We're very excited about the partnership with RedLine, and they are an especially technically enabled partner. So made a good choice to be doing business with them for sure. My name's Justin Griffith. I'm the CTO at StayLinked. I've been with the company 15 years, and I actually started as the company's first tech support person. So I can get pretty dangerous technically. So please feel free to type in your questions as they come up, and we'll try and leave a little time at the end for Q&A. And if there's no time, we'll be sure to follow up with you guys on that. So again, we're just going to go over StayLinked kind of at a high level and sort of dive in specifically around a couple of the details of doing modernization. So a bit about us. We've been in business since '91. We've been doing the terminal emulation side of the business for it's actually a little closer to 15 years, but the StayLinked branding for 13. We have the highest level of security of any terminal emulation solution. And that's enabled through the architecture that we'll cover pretty much in detail in this presentation. But there's a lot of advantages to the architecture that we've designed. And when we explain the architecture, it becomes kind of easy to understand why we made the decisions we made and how that's played out when we start talking about things like Android. So some of the things that we address just by virtue of installing, one, we have a very, what we call our fair licensing model. So it's a concurrent connection licensing model. Instead of licensing by the number of devices you own, it's by the number of devices you're actively using. The drop session thing, a very, very common, probably the most commonly reported issue with Telnet, just goes away. That's how we got the name. That's actually how we made a name for ourselves in terminal emulation. We support any device and any platform at this point, short of BlackBerry, but pretty much anything else under the sun. We're the only product out there right now for the enterprise that supports Win 10 for TE. We as a company have a really sharp focus on this. We're kind of specialists with terminal emulation. And so we've got a lot of intimate knowledge about sort of the challenges that people are likely to run into and sort of the solutions that we've designed to sort of elegantly work around those and make people's lives a lot easier. So the two main focuses that the company has right now. are on application modernization, which we'll dive into detail, and then we'll also give you guys a preview of the business intelligence product we're working on called Stay-Linked IQ. All right, so where we like to start off is sort of the history of TE, because again, if you can understand where TE came from, it becomes kind of easy to understand why there are so many problems with it today and why we made the decisions we made about the technology. TE started off looking a lot like this. You had a wired dumb terminal connected to a big host computer. So this is back as far as 1969, right? So a 48-year-old protocol was designed to connect dumb terminals for doing data entry. So the workflow, you know, in our industries kind of went like this. People would be running around the warehouse with pen and paper, and then they would take all the stacks of paper and sit them in front of a terminal and do data entry into these terminal applications. Then when PCs come out, we still needed access to terminal apps because by now they were running the enterprise. The first major systems to come out were all warehouse management, financial packages, inventory control systems, all that stuff. So they're running the enterprise, despite the fact that PCs are readily available in the 80s, people still needed access to terminal apps. So they did it by running a piece of software that made it look like one of these dumb terminals was connecting it, emulated dumb terminals. So that's where the phrase terminal emulation comes from. So even today, these systems still don't know that it's not one of these dumb terminals connecting. But ultimately, the workflow didn't change. You still had a bunch of pen and paper around the warehouse or wherever the workflow is happening, and then people sitting now in front of PCs instead of terminals to do the data entry. So where the big leap in technology happened was when wireless entered the picture. And people thought, okay, well, what if we could do, instead of pen and paper around the warehouse, what if we could hand people the computers and they could update this stuff in real time? Groundbreaking idea. All of a sudden, real-time data collection became a thing. The big hiccup that happened here, though, is ultimately the technology that was connecting them back to the host system never changed. And so now we had this 48-year-old protocol connecting over a wireless environment that it was never designed to run over. Telnet is sort of infamous for being a fragile connection method. So any sort of interruption that would happen, say walk out of range of an access point or have a network hiccup or run a battery dry, reboot, even something as simple as letting the device fall asleep to save battery life. And you get what's called a hung session. And hung sessions are kind of tantamount to you have a phone call going with the host system and the phone call drops, and when you call back, the system completely forgot who you were. You can't reestablish a conversation you were having. You got to start over. So there were a couple of early attempts to fix it. First one was a wired gateway computer. A lot of the manufacturers for the mobile devices came out with their own controllers and things like that. And really, the whole purpose of this was to have a sort of keep alive, something playing the game of telephone saying the device said this, and forwarding all the traffic onto the host system. The issue with these is that they didn't get a lot of love from the people who made them. And so as these began to age out, their reliability started to come into question. And if they ever went down, you'd lose all your connections all at once instead of these onesie-twosie drops throughout the day. So that was the state of Telnet about 15 years ago. So ultimately what we decided on was that most of the problems that people had with TE had nothing to do with the mobile devices they were running, had nothing to do with the wireless infrastructure, with the application, with the servers they were connecting to. The real problem was that they were trying to run a 48-year-old protocol in an environment it was never designed to run. And so we sort of decided that the only way to solve all the problems a 48-year-old protocol has with wireless is to not use it. And so to do that, we created a thin client architecture. So instead of a Telnet client running on the mobile devices, we have our thin client software, and then loaded either directly on the host system they were connecting to, or on a virtual machine nearby, or on whatever. We've got a server for pretty much anything. Like we've got a server for Mac for no reason. We have this server software. And it's also very light. It's all about 150 megabytes of software. But now we have a piece running on either side of the network. We have a piece running on the mobile device, a piece running on the server, which means we can use our own protocol to connect now instead of the 48-year-old one. So what the Staylink server does then is, for every connection we receive on the Staylink side, we initiate a Telnet session on the device's behalf. We turn the devices into remote controls for sessions that never leave the most reliable hardware in the whole enterprise. So extremely bulletproof. Where this really has had a profound impact, though, is when we start talking about modernization. Yes, you get a lot of stuff from it. Session persistence, right? We can survive stuff no other Telnet client in the world can. We can survive cold boots of a mobile device. You can uninstall the software and reinstall it, still pick up where you left off. We can transfer sessions between mobile devices and things like that. But where this really starts to shine, though, is when we start talking about modernization. There's really sort of two schools of thought on this. In the world of Telnet, wherever the most important part of the connection happens, that's where all the configuration has to happen too. So for just about every other Telnet client in the world, the most important part of the connection happens on the device, which means if you want to change how that device interacts with the host, either what the user sees in the graphic interface or change even basic configuration like keyboard maps or barcode settings, you got to do it device by device. You got to find a way to manage the configurations on each mobile device you have connecting. In the case of Staylink, we've moved the most important part of the connection up to our server-side client, which means 99% of the configuration you used to have to do device by device can now happen at the server. And all you have to do to get that to take effect is start a new session. Or in some cases, you just disconnect and reconnect and see the effect happen immediately. That's become such a huge concern for people who are doing migration to these new OSs like Android when you start talking about graphic enablement. How quickly can you make the changes happen? How quickly can you get feedback on a brand new interface for your users? So we think we've got a great architecture for that, but it does beg the question, why modernize at all? You know, Telnet has been one of those applications that was feared to be dying when I got into the industry. I remember the day I started, my boss said, don't get comfortable, it maybe has 3 years left. That was 15 years ago. And we'll kind of address that, but why modernize in the first place? There's a couple of things sort of pushing this forward. One is a tech-savvy workforce. All of a sudden, you have the most technically enabled workforce in history entering the marketplace here. And so they're more familiar with touchscreens. And so the manufacturers are developing more touchscreen devices. That sort of pushes a lot of the app developers to begin addressing that touchscreen environment. This whole push towards smart OSs, you know, the expectation set by these operating systems is higher end than what people are used to seeing maybe in the rugged space. There's also this growing trend toward 3PLs. All of a sudden, there's a lot larger push toward hiring specialists to do their job instead of companies that don't have a lot of logistics experience taking it on themselves. There's, of course, the Amazon effect. So if you're in the logistics business, congratulations, you are now competing with same-day delivery. These touchscreen devices, all of a sudden the manufacturers have started pushing out devices without a keyboard. And the implications of that are subtle and have this sort of quaking effect on the industry when you do something as simple as getting rid of one of the high failure pieces of a mobile device. And then finally, this whole technology evolution. And I like to sum this up as drones flying around the warehouse, you know, or self-driving forklifts and things like that. It's sort of this push towards more modern technology. We can now, so we should kind of stuff. So, so what can you do with a TE environment? You know, how do you move forward and keep up with all of these growing trends in the industry? How do you do that without spending a lot of money? Because, yeah, you could spend as much money as you want. They will let you spend as much money as you want on all these cool things. But how do you do that without taking on a lot of risk, one, by buying a lot of equipment you don't get full value for? And how, most importantly, how do you do this without negatively impacting the productivity you're already getting? What good does it do you to implement technology if you're going to see this huge hiccup in productivity for months you may never recover from? And then why modernize a TE app? You know, if something has been working this whole time, why go from text to graphics? You know, the support of touchscreen interfaces and mobile devices that don't have keyboards. You know, how do you get to a more intuitive user interface, something that new workers would be used to seeing, as opposed to picking up a device and having it look like DOS, right? And thereby increase the productivity and usability of these things. And if you're going to go through all that effort, why not replace the TE app entirely, right? The short answer is a lot of people have tried in a lot of different ways. And nothing quite replaces the ubiquitousness of TE, sort of centralized architecture, or the investment that people have put into it. You know, there's a lot of high cost and high risk with doing any of those other strategies. If you rewrite an app entirely, there's no guarantee that you don't spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a brand new fancy web app and end up having a slower app than you had before and losing productivity. So really, on a lot of fronts, nothing equals the speed, the reliability, again, the ubiquitousness of TE, or the integration with the mobile devices. All right, so our answer to this stuff, ST-Link Smart TE. We kind of took an entirely different approach to how we modernize TE. This conversation has actually been going on in the terminal emulation space for well over 20 years. We are not the first people to think that if you could just have a graphic interface over the top of TE, people would like it much better. What we really saw as being the problem was the intuitiveness of modernization, but also the underlying technology. And you can kind of see that in sort of how a lot of the modernization conversations have gone so far. But really it boils down to the question of, if you could keep all the speed and productivity you get out of TE today, but have all the graphic front end and capability and all the value you get from a very intuitive, fast app, it's sort of the best of both worlds. All right, so a couple of key features. We have two versions of our modernization, and they can be used sort of each individually or both in tandem. So we have what's called dynamic screen modernization and designer. And what that sets up is a really nice workflow for getting what we call rapid acceptance. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the best strategy for modernizing. But the high points here is there's no file deployment to do our modernization. There are no config files to maintain on each mobile device. There's no programming necessary. It's all done through the same interface we've been doing our management with this whole time. It's all entirely unified. So a single system, without having to deploy any additional software, can not only maintain all of your terminal emulation needs, but also modernize, okay? It also requires no changes to the back-end app, okay? Probably the most important point of this, though, is what we call incremental app modernization. And again, we'll talk about that when we talk about modernization strategy, but it's summed up really as rolling these things out gradually. And then lastly, we'll kind of touch on measuring the productivity with ST-Link IQ. This is sort of the other conversation I like to hit on when talking about modernization. How could you tell? You know, if you modernize something, how could you tell whether it really helped or not? It might look better, but did you get more boxes out the door? And in my opinion, that is why Telnet has maintained such relevance even now, is that pound for pound, nothing gets more boxes out the door. And in industries where that is the true measure of success, nothing's going to replace something that gets more boxes out the door, right? So that was our main focus behind these features. All right, so us versus some of the other modernization strategies. One, it's built on the foundation of the most reliable terminal emulation available today. You know, if you were getting 10% more productivity by modernizing and that were being eaten up by the 10% you never fixed because you're subject to drops every time you walk out of range, you'd evened out. So what we're giving is a baseline that is already more productive by having a very reliable TE, but then building on that productivity with modernization. We have auto deployment, so again, no device updates required. We have a very nice platform for doing incremental app modernization, where the competition, you have to kind of do these big bang cutovers or these big file deployments and version control and all of that stuff. The feedback loop can be a lot longer. It is accurate and reliable even in automatic mode. And we really tried to take a do no harm to the application approach with this, where if for whatever reason some corner case screen shows up, we are tolerant of that the user can still use the app. They can still get their job done. The whole thing doesn't fall apart. There's very low resource burden on the mobile device, even with full graphics. It is also the most secure Telnet available today. So we encrypt it with what's called Blowfish, which is banking level encryption. And we also have a very nice integration with the leading MDM, EDM software available today with SODI. A couple of other points. Again, our fair licensing. It is not only based on concurrent user, but this is important when we talk device refresh. You can start using Stay-Link today and get all the productivity just out of the product that we offer today. But then when you roll onto mobile devices like Android and the smarter OSs, those licenses migrate with you. You aren't rebuying the terminal emulation software, which means when you buy Stay-Link, you bought TE for the last time. We put a lot of effort into support on all the mobile devices that are coming out. We've got kind of a cool feature, Smart Keyboard, which is to address all of these devices that are coming out without keyboards built in, and something that we saw as being a key flaw in those mobile devices, we solved with this Smart Keyboard. It's the fastest TE in the industry, even over very thin networks. And finally, the architectural advantages and what that gives us in the way of persistence and administration and configuration and business intelligence, all in one package, without having to deploy a number of servers or configuration software. Okay, so I actually, just as a case study, I went out and personally did a deployment using a very modern device, the TC8000 from Zebra, at a customer site at Nike. And they had a couple of interesting challenges. One is a good number of the users were in Europe. And the thing about modernization that you'll discover is there is a feedback loop. People will either like the modernization or not. And so the quicker you can get what they want to see in their head to what they see on the device, the better off you'll be. They also had a mix of devices. They were migrating entirely to Android. And so there were a lot of challenges going into this. So I went out to just kind of see how easy it would be. You know, we developed this product, you know, and put a lot of effort into it, but I'd never tried it. So where we ended up is they were able to fully deploy those Android devices using 5 dynamic screen rules and 5 design screens. So we were fully functional in 2 hours, and then we refined it over 5 hours in 2 different sessions. But using that now, they can deploy those devices out of box to setup. They install the software, and it's done. There's no config files to deploy. The brand new devices pick up the configuration the moment they connect, right? So that no deployment update really made a huge difference, especially for Europe, where our overlap with them was basically 1 hour. We had 1 hour to make some improvements, take some feedback, and deploy it very quickly to get their feedback. Okay, so the initial deployment actually happened in Europe. So we did this by following what I like to call a rapid adoption strategy. And this really speaks to the quick adoption of Android as a whole, but especially with the Zebra devices and the Zebra devices without keyboards. We really broke it up into 3 steps. The first and foremost is the most important, and that is replicate the functionality you're doing today, just better. Make sure these devices can do the same job they're doing today which really meant for us building a incredibly highly functional TE client. Before we even talk modernization, build a highly functional TE client to make sure that you weren't losing productivity when you started using these devices. On these devices in particular, the TC8000 and the WT6000, you'll notice there's no keyboard, and they did that for a very good reason. By moving to Android, you can use newer hardware, right, like Gorilla Glass screens and things like that. And there are two of the most common failure points in mobile devices are the keyboard and the screen. So there were great reasons for building this model, but it presented an interesting challenge. If you use one of these devices without a keyboard, you've moved something that had its own physical space on the mobile device, and you've put it now on the screen where they were used to seeing all their application data, which means if you pop the keyboard, you would lose half your screen. You're in the way. So we sort of revamped our thinking on this. Actually, these two devices in particular really drove these features, but we said, okay, in order for the keyboard to not be in the way, you had to see through it. And so we added a transparency level to the keyboard. But that sort of drove a whole new line of features. We started thinking, okay, well, if you could see through the keyboard, you could make the whole screen a keyboard. And so now all of a sudden the wearable, which people had been complaining about size, became the biggest keyboard available on mobile devices, allowing users to see right through what they were typing. But then we thought, okay, well, what if they really need to see what's on the screen and the keyboard's in the way? So you could do things like tap and hold on the keyboard and make it completely disappear. And when you lifted your finger, the keyboard would come back. So what this allowed was instantly anyone could start using these mobile devices in the same workflows they're doing today. No graphics, no modernization, just a modern device. And people love them. These devices are truly lovable devices. They're incredibly cool. People like using them. Feels like holding a phaser. It's very high tech, but they're not losing productivity. It's not costing them anything now to use these devices. Then what we said is the next step is what we call dynamic modernization, right? And this was pretty important to us. We made a lot of design decisions around this in that we wanted to make sure that we didn't change around the screen so profoundly that the users had no idea what they were looking at. So we took a different approach. We said, all right, modernize and buttonize the app they're used to seeing. Just turn up the volume on the graphics a little bit. And that's so important for user acceptance. And really this step, you know, I kind of call it the millennial conundrum, right? The dialogue around modernization for the incoming millennial wave of workers, in my opinion, is kind of overblown. And more importantly, that's not the workforce you have today. You have the workforce you've always had. And so it's really important to find a way to walk the existing workforce you have today to something that's millennial proof, right? Something that's fully graphic and used to what, or looks the way people are used to seeing. So that's what dynamic was about. Begin to have the users start driving the app from the interface and make these small changes, like instead of it saying F3 equals exit, just have the button say exit and get people away from thinking in terms of function keys and control keys and all these obscure button combinations. Get them touching buttons on the screen. Finally, the third step is go full graphics, right? And in my opinion, the best approach to this is actually sort of a hybrid. There are only so many screens that have truly high graphic value. There's an illustration of one of them on the screen there, this big warning message. That gives great return on investment when you modernize those screens. Those screens used to look like DOS screens saying, warning, do you want to sign out? But you can do all sorts of stuff when you go full graphics, not the least of which is training. You know, if you go from an app where there were 56 buttons you could hit to screw the app up, to all of a sudden just having two buttons on the screen, one that moves them forward and one that moves them back, that's a huge productivity gain. You know, that's an incredibly simple training curve. So those are the three approaches. Start with what you're doing today, gradually turn up the volume to walk your users to a graphic app, and then finally start executing at your own pace where the highest graphic value is. Okay. Finally, just a quick preview of StayLink IQ. IQ, we actually have a free preview embedded in every StayLink server, and the free preview actually lets you monitor 3 activities that happen within the application. And there's sort of the obvious examples. We actually have a live demo of this on the internet, you know, where you could track productivity, picking, receiving, put away, all that stuff. But we have all this incredible visibility by having a piece on the mobile device and a piece running on the server. We kind of have a mini network trace. So you don't see it in the free preview, but there's all this stuff we're aware of, like how many times the device went out of range, or you know, had a coverage issue, or had a network hiccup, or how many times or how long it took for the server to respond. And all of a sudden now, you have this full picture. What it's providing is the context, because there are a lot of reporting dashboards, but there isn't a whole lot that explains why you see what you see. If a user took 10 minutes to do a job, it took them 3 yesterday, why? Why did all that happen? So StayLink IQ is all about providing context, being able to see a day in the life at every level of the organization. So look for that around Q1. We're going live with some of the top 10 brands in the world with that in beta in the next 3 weeks. And we'll be updating the internet hosted demo to give you guys a preview of some of this stuff. But that's the other focus of the company, is the StayLink IQ. All right, that sums it up for me. I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to the guys at RedLine. Thank you. And if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in to the chat section there on the meeting. Guys?
Great. Well, thank you, Justin. This is Todd Baggett from RedLine, and I want to talk a little bit now about some of these mobile devices. So this screen's a little bit of an eye chart, but I wanted to really point out that there is a wide variety of mobile devices that Zebra manufactures that are used in a multitude of applications. So if you just look across the top there, it's kind of showing you the retail, hospitality, healthcare. We've got the development tools in the middle, and then the different devices for the warehouse, manufacturing, and the back end of the store as well. And these range from handheld devices to wearable devices to vehicle mount devices. And on the top, you'll see some of the tablets and the PDAs. So this particular device has gotten a lot of attention. It's the TC8000, and really it's a little bit of a game changer from a standpoint of some of the pieces Justin talked about. It is an Android-only device. There is no keyboard on the device as far as physical keys, and it's also been redesigned in a way where they've looked at the ergonomics. Probably the biggest claim to fame on this is that it reduces the wrist motion by over 55% and reduces the muscle effort by 15%, and that translates into roughly a 14% increase in productivity. If you look at the prior generations, you always had to point the device at yourself to look at the screen, and then you'd point the device what you wanted to scan, and you do your scan. With this particular device, you can actually do the scan while looking at the screen. This is the more kind of traditional device that TC8000 is kind of the next generation of. On the Zebra side, they start out with the MC9090 and went to the 9100, and they're currently at the 9200. A couple important things about the 9200 is it is available in Android and in Windows, and in fact there's a version of it that you can buy your Windows application now and then in the future upgrade to Android. These are by far the biggest selling device that we've ever seen in the history of this industry from a standpoint of rugged mobile computers. This one, as you see, has a touch screen on it, but it also has the traditional keyboards as well. We also talked a little bit about the wearable, and here's an example of the wearable. This one, the WT6000, is an Android only as well. So again, you've got the virtual keyboards you can pop up. It is something that can be used with a Bluetooth or a ring scanner that is corded, so that you can literally have your hands free to pick things up when you're doing heavy pick and pack type of operations. This is another workhorse that we've seen, the TC70, and this is kind of your more traditional, what I would call the brick style, but it's a lot thinner, a lot smaller, and it's very rugged. If you go into Home Depot and look at what the associates have there, you'll see this device. It is very, very fast. It's a lot stronger than the other devices and can withstand multiple drops to concrete. This one is available in the Android operating system as well, and there is both a Wi-Fi only and a Wi-Fi and cellular version of this. So, to wrap it up here before we get into the Q&A, what I really wanted to point out was to give some examples of some of the devices that are these new age of devices that really give you that graphical experience for the user, as well as the Android OS. And one of the things that's really been pushing the Android OS, can you go back one slide there?
Yes.
One of the things that's really been driving the Android OS migration is Microsoft is really kind of backed out of the ruggedized market. And when I say that, the last two operating systems that they brought out, Windows 8 and now Windows 10, are really more of a kind of a locked kernel. So to put that in perspective, it's more like an iPhone or an Apple iOS device in that as a developer, you no longer have the access to do controls to go in there and say, at this point in the application, I want to flash the screen, or I want to disable the scanner, or only enable key data entry. Those are traditional things that we work with in the Windows world that really kind of stopped in the Windows embedded handheld 6.5 and CE. And what we see moving forward is in 2020, Microsoft will stop doing security support on those two operating systems, CE and Windows Mobile 6.5. And when that happens, most of these devices that are on the enterprise security folks within the IT departments are going to say, no, we can't have these on our network anymore. So Zebra is giving you a migration path if you still have Windows applications, and if you're ready to move forward, you've got the Android. And the nice thing about the Stay Linked, and we've done this deployment with a customer, is that it actually quickly moves them into not only the new operating system, but it makes that operating system more effective for them. One of our customers that we deployed this system in immediately got a 10% productivity gain just by eliminating all of the fields that they used to just skip by. They'd hit the enter key to just pass by it, and now those fields are not even in the application. The next thing is, because of the graphical interface is so intuitive, that once they implement it, they found that their productivity jumped about another 25%, and their training time was cut in half. So this really is a game-changing tool. I'm really excited about the work that we're doing with Stay Linked, and I think if you're using a Telnet application now, this is something that you want to invest a little bit of time in exploring. One of the fascinating things to me is that the customer we did this deployment with had something like 60 screens that they were working with, because this was a warehouse application that they'd had for roughly about 18 years. And when they got that going and they started converting those screens, they were able to actually do those really quickly and had those applications up and running, literally had all the design done in about 3 days. Probably the last part of this that I want to emphasize is the goal of this tool is not for you to have to constantly come back to us for professional services. It is a specialized area. We have that skill set, and we're happy to do that as a service for you. But if you have internal people who want to learn how to do this, you can become self-sufficient in this and really just look at us as your backup and support. So with that, Adrian, let's go ahead and go on and see if we have any questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I jump off that slide, I've got a question here. How close to the end of the screen is the sensitivity for most of these items? So I thought I'd leave that particular one up.
How close is the sensitivity? Like how close?
How close can you get to the edge of the actual screen itself? That's how I
got to that edge of the screen. It's basically, it is the full screen there that you can have. You've got the screen size there, which is a 4.7-inch HD display, and you can literally put your graphics right up to the edge.
Good, good. So I hope that answered your question. So like we said, any questions, please put them in your box. I've got a couple of other questions here. Do you see Telnet going away?
I love this question. Not anytime soon. And this is largely, again, around the efficiency question. You know, the only thing that would replace Telnet is something that moves faster than Telnet in the end. You know, and people are willing to suffer a bit of productivity for looks if the looks have high value and they pick up the productivity someplace else, like training and things like that. But again, especially with the new technologies and modernization and the technology behind modernization being so much better than, say, it was 20 years ago, it really keeps finding its relevance. And everything that has supposed to been the panacea for data collection, RFID and voice and automation and all these things, they kind of find their balance point. And Telnet has found and will likely keep its balance point until robots take over. That's kind of my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Okay, right, so we've got one here. It's Zebra is a touchscreen emulation that they say is built into their system. Why theirs and not your the Zebra one? Oh.
It all boils down to kind of the architecture of these things. You know, the one included with the Zebra devices, the principle behind it was, again, we'll build in a great amount of logic to do some automatic out-of-box modernization to make these devices viable from day one. And that should get us about 80% of the way there. And then we could make up the other 20% with a good configuration utility and strong infrastructure for doing custom modernization, screen by screen. What actually happened, and this really sort of comes out of our pedigree. Before doing TE, we were application people. We actually wrote back-end systems. We wrote server applications. So made a killing in Y2K, and when that business dried up, we got into Telnet. So we came at it from the application side, and what we knew to be true was that no one has the out-of-box solution from any provider of WMS or ERP packages. Everyone has something customized about it. So attempting to build in an architecture that would predict any of that is doomed. You know, what you need is something that has the flexibility to change on the fly. So that's what we created in our dynamic. We go through and find the obvious stuff, no sweat. You know, menu numbers and letters and function keys and all of that stuff is very easy to find. But if you had a menu that started with numbers on one screen and then the next screen started with letters, a lot of times that would break down anything that's built in. What we built in was something that allowed you to go back and change the formula and get a totally different user experience just by reconnecting the devices. Now the server is applying a totally different logic to the app. So that's what's causing the quick turnaround times and why we can deploy thousands of devices in 2 hours, is we can change the software without having to recode it.
And if I may add, this is Todd Baggett. We had some customers that we started working with the product that came with the Zebra and ran into some of those challenges where they were working on these applications for 2, 3, 4 weeks at a time trying to get things through. So when we got to Stay Linked and I saw 3 weeks and 4 weeks turning into hours and days, I was really excited, and it really made a difference for our customer in that we were able to get a customer live, literally get all their screens redesigned in 3 days, as opposed to, you know, the months that we'd been working with some other customers were on the other product.
Well, and listening to this, I think one of the things that you talked about was the bulletproof connection, because the Zebra piece is still on the Zebra terminal, whereas yours, you know, goes beyond that. So they've still got the challenge of the connectivity.
Right. Yeah. Well, and there's so you look at this sort of architecture of software. So we built this thing to be its standalone solution. We could make no assumptions that you already had an MDM in place or that there was any other supporting software. Literally, as a start for the other software, you need to find a way to either find a way to keep the devices connected always and all the time, or install another piece of software to keep the connection going. Then you need a configuration software to create the config files and import the screens. And then you get a config file at the other end, and now you need to get those out to the mobile devices, which means you're either flashing individual devices, again, because that's where the most important part of the connection is happening, or now you install another piece of software to manage the files that are deployed out to the mobile device. So the picture starts to grow and grow and grow and grow, all these pieces that sort of get tacked on to get that level of functionality. Whereas ours, it's just sort of this all-in-one cohesive kind of solution.
So I think we probably covered this one, explain the benefits of Stay-Link, but I kind of see you've got the intuitive graphics, you've got touch capability, bulletproof connection, simpler configuration, but you're keeping the speed and the security of your current TE app.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. That was a great summary.
So a couple of other questions. You mentioned a migration on mobile devices from Windows to Android. Can you tell me what's driving this?
Yeah, so on the migration, I think a lot of it is driven by Microsoft themselves and their end of support life for the Windows embedded handheld, which is also known as Windows Mobile 6.5 as well as CE. And those have been the stalwarts and really haven't changed a lot since 2009. So here we are, 8 years later, and we're still using the same tools. And the challenge there is that those development tools on the Microsoft side have changed as well. And so now as a developer, because here at RedLine, we're developing our own applications as well, we're looking at that saying, this doesn't work for us anymore. We need to move on to Android and some of these newer things so that they have a life. And most of those devices that you saw up there, the life of those in the customer's business is 5 to 10 years. So if you're buying something in 2017 and the end of security support is 2020, you've now either got a 3-year product life, or you have to have a migration strategy, or just go straight now to Android.
Okay. And Justin, you mentioned that the use of things like Gorilla Glass in Android, and it's not available. And obviously having those kind of features are very beneficial when you're in a warehouse environment. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of things you can't do on CE and Windows Mobile. You can't use a hyper rugged screen because there's no drivers for it, but Android has all that stuff. It's one of the things that for all the faults of what consumer grade products do to this industry, it has driven in some places the adoption of these sort of hyper rugged things that, allow people to take their phones into showers and things like that. That applied to hyper rugged devices in the first place. The implications are huge for the life cycles of these things, how often you're having to send them in repair. That is part and parcel to the OS they're running. There's just things we could only do with Android and some of these smart OSs, like a see-through keyboard. That's a very, it sounds easy, but the underlying software that it takes is only easy on us because it's Android.
And if I may, I do want to throw one other thing in on Android, and that is that, one of the challenges in the consumer market, your Samsung phones, your iPhone, et cetera, is that the OSs are migrating about every 2 to 3 months. And so one of the things I really like about what Zebra's done is they choose the platform that they're going to start on, whether it's KitKat, Marshmallow, Lollipop, and they release the product on that, and they actually have an extended service you can buy that will give you the guarantee that that operating system will be supported for you for an additional 3 years past the discontinuance of the provider of the original Android software. So at that point, Zebra will extend that. So that's really critical in an enterprise application where you're rolling out hundreds of devices across multitudes of sites. You can't have 16 different OSs out there because your support team would grow huge and it would be a nightmare. So what you're trying to do is say, hey, give me a stable operating system that I can work with, and now give me a life so that I can have this thing work for 5 to 7 years, so that in the field I can get the value out of these rugged devices that I'm deploying. And one last thing on Zebra, on their use of Android, is they've actually put some extensions in there that most other manufacturers don't have, which give you extra security and extra protection for a lot of the things that have been traditional knocks on the Android OS, and they call that the MX platform on the Zebra side.
Yeah, and just one other note on that. You know, there's a number of manufacturers out there who have some sort of Android offering, and the issue is that there's really only one manufacturer who bet on Android early. You know, Zebra was talking Android before it was cool, and what's come out the other end of that is they have the experience of what, you know, it's one of the reasons you work with a company like RedLine, is that the experience of these devices in a warehouse environment, even at a very basic level of addressing questions like, I don't want my users to be able to close the app. You know, Zebra has an answer for that. Whereas, again, you'd be stuck if you're going with some other manufacturer, potentially you're adding more and more software to answer these very basic questions where they have it built in. You know, they have an architecture that fully supports MDM software, where a lot of the other manufacturers don't. So this is the benefit of working with a hardware manufacturer who's been banging on an OS for 6 years, where some other people are just getting started and they don't know what they don't know about what they're going to run into with Android.
Good point.
Okay. So we have a question. How long does it normally take to convert a Telnet application to a graphical application?
Minutes. And it really, this is sort of it's a bit of a loaded question. You can go immediately graphic, and you'd be shocked at how low the bar is for graphics with Telnet users. If you add a background image, you have a graphic app. If you buttonize menu systems and function keys and stuff within the screen, you have a graphic app. You know, if you're talking go full graphics, web app, full designer for every screen out there, that is more work. And probably something that is worth doing over time. You know, the instant usability of the devices and Android happens immediately. And so that's sort of the line of conversation that we've been having is start using these devices immediately. Start getting the 14% the TC8000 was engineered to give you today. Use the touchscreen keyboard, and every user who's been using that app will be able to work with that device and get more productivity for it. Then dial up the graphics again and start collecting on more and more and more of it. Don't start the conversation by saying, I want the 120% graphic app, you know, because then you won't get it until you get the app you've designed for 120%. There's a lot of productivity to collect between now and then.
Yeah, I really like that approach too, Justin, about the incremental change, because also if you think about the users, you know, some of them that have been doing the old green screen Telnet applications for 15 plus years are going to feel more comfortable when it's gradually brought out to them instead of instantly go from a green screen to the high-end graphic application, which they may not have as much experience with.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that we found with IQ is, you know, it's really important to do A/B testing. And what you may find is the graphics is very productive for particular users. And if your workers who have been working on a Telnet interface app are faster with a Telnet interface app, then let them use the Telnet interface app. You don't have to pick and choose. You could literally have the same device connect to an app, and this is actually exactly what our demo does. You could have the same device connect to the same app, one with no graphics and just a see-through keyboard, one with some graphics, but the same application layout they're familiar to seeing, and then finally full graphics and what that's capable of. So that would be another key differentiator between us and our competition is you don't necessarily have to choose.
Excellent. So we have time for one more question. We have multiple manufacturing devices. How do you set this up and work with different devices?
This is a really important question too, because you may have devices with different form factors. You may have devices with, you know, different layouts or optimized in a different way. You know,
and different manufacturers, right?
Sure. Yeah. Potentially, you've got a mix of devices or something. You know, or vehicle mounts and handhelds, and they're completely different real estate profiles. So it's almost a more important question to answer. Do you have a platform that can support all that? Which is really what we tried to engineer. we engineered the thin clients, and it's partly how we're so quick about supporting devices. Is we engineered this platform so that we aren't relying a great deal on the device. You know, we're not relying on it to stay connected all the time. We aren't relying on the form factors to be the same. So it is this sort of universal platform, the great leveler, if you will, of mobile devices and deploying that. The same configuration you light up today on a 9200 Android will work the moment you light up a TC8000.
Excellent. So please remember, if you're currently using a Telnet application and want to increase your staff's productivity by enabling intuitive graphic interfaces which touch capability, a bulletproof connection with simpler configuration, or while keeping the speed and security of your current Telnet application, call or email RedLine Solutions and we can talk you through your options. I'd like to thank everyone again for signing into the event. Thank you to our great presenters, and a big thank you to our sponsors, Zebra Technologies. And we hope to see you all soon on another RedLine webinar.